I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment after a 12-hour construction shift when my phone buzzed with a text from my father. The message hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "We've changed all the locks. You're not welcome here anymore. Let's see how tough you are now." My hands started shaking as I read those words over and over. For 3 years, I'd been sending my parents $800 every single month to help with their mortgage after Dad lost his job. I'd given up vacations, canceled dates, postponed my dreams of buying my own place because I believed family meant something. Now they were treating me like some stranger they wanted to keep out. What they didn't know was that my name was legally on that deed. The drive to my childhood home in suburban Phoenix felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every traffic light seemed to mock me as I replayed that text message in my head. When I pulled into the driveway of the modest ranch-style house where I'd grown up, the first thing I noticed were the shiny new deadbolts gleaming on the front door like tiny soldiers standing guard against me. I walked up to the door and tried my key. Nothing. The metal scraped uselessly against the new lock mechanism. Through the living room window, I could see my younger brother Tyler sprawled across the leather couch that I'd helped them buy last Christmas. His dirty sneakers were propped up on the coffee table I'd spent an entire weekend assembling from some Swedish furniture store. I pounded on the door with my fist, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. A few curtains twitched in nearby windows as neighbors wondered what the commotion was about. After what felt like forever, I heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door opened just wide enough for my mother Carol to peer out the chain lock still engaged. Her face wore an expression I'd never seen before, like she was looking at something disgusting she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "James, you need to leave," she said, her voice cold and rehearsed. "We don't want you here anymore." "Mom, what are you talking about?" "This is insane. Let me in so we can discuss whatever's going on." "There's nothing to discuss. You've been disrespectful and ungrateful for months. We're done enabling your behavior." The words sounded strange coming from her mouth, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. Behind her, I could hear Tyler's voice calling out, "Is he gone yet?" "Tyler," I called through the crack in the door. "What did you tell them?" The chain rattled as Carol closed the door completely. A moment later, it reopened wider, and Tyler appeared beside our mother with a smirk that made my blood boil. "I didn't tell them anything they didn't need to know," he said, crossing his arms. "Like how you've been calling them dead weight behind their backs. Or how you keep bragging to your construction buddies about owning part of this house and planning to kick them out when it's convenient." My jaw dropped. "That's completely false and you know it." "Is it though?" Tyler stepped closer to the door. "Mom and Dad deserve better than a son who sees them as an investment opportunity." I looked past him to my mother, searching her face for any sign that she knew Tyler was lying. But her expression remained stone cold, convinced by whatever poison my brother had been dripping in her ears. "Tyler, I've never said any of those things. I've been helping you guys because I love you." "Right," Tyler scoffed. "That's why you keep reminding Dad about how much money you send every month. That's real love." The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth to it. I had mentioned the monthly payments during arguments, usually when Tyler was asking for money for his own expenses while contributing nothing to the household. "At least I contribute something," I shot back. "What do you do besides live here rent-free?" Tyler's smirk widened. "I take care of them emotionally. I don't treat this place like a business transaction." That's when it hit me. Tyler wanted the house for himself. He'd been working on this plan for months, slowly turning our parents against me, while positioning himself as the devoted son who deserved to inherit everything. What Tyler didn't realize was that when I'd helped Dad refinance the house 2 years ago, my name had been added to the deed as a co-signer. I wasn't just some ungrateful son making empty threats about ownership. I was literally a legal co-owner of the property. Tyler continued his performance. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect." Madison and I need a place to start our lives together, and this house has been in our family for years. It should stay with people who actually care about it. Madison. His girlfriend of 8 months who'd been pushing him to secure their future ever since they got engaged. Suddenly, Tyler's motivation became crystal clear. "You're making a huge mistake," I said quietly. "The only mistake was Mom and Dad trusting you for so long," Tyler replied. "But don't worry, we'll take good care of the place." Carol nodded along with everything Tyler said, her maternal instincts completely hijacked by his manipulation. As they closed the door in my face, I heard the new deadbolt slide into place with a definitive click. Standing there on the porch where I'd sat countless times as a kid, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Patricia Hendricks' number. She'd been our family attorney for over a decade and had handled the refinancing paperwork. If anyone could help me understand my legal position, it would be her. "Patricia, it's James. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's about the house." Patricia's law office sat in a converted Victorian house downtown, its burgundy carpet and dark wood paneling, giving it an old-school authority that made people take their legal problems seriously. I'd been pacing in the waiting room for 10 minutes when she emerged from her office, a stack of manila folders tucked under her arm. "James, come on back. I pulled all the files related to your parents' property after your call." Patricia had been practicing law for 30 years, and her gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses made her look exactly like what central casting would order for a trusted family attorney. She spread the paperwork across her conference table like a detective laying out evidence. "Let's start with the basics," she said, adjusting her glasses. "When your father needed to refinance 2 years ago, you co-signed the loan and your name was added to the deed. That makes you a legal co-owner with a 40% stake in the property." I nodded. "I remember signing all those papers, but I never really thought about what it meant long-term." "Most people don't." Patricia pulled out a county record document. "But here's where things get interesting. I ran a title search this morning, and there are some significant issues with the property taxes." She handed me a notice from Maricopa County. The official letterhead made my stomach drop before I even read the contents. "They're 3 months behind on property taxes," I asked, scanning the document. 97 days to be precise. And according to Arizona law, if they hit 120 days delinquent, the county can begin foreclosure proceedings. I sank back in my chair. "But I've been sending them $800 every month specifically for the mortgage and property expenses." Patricia pulled out another folder. "I did some digging into your parents' financial records, the ones that are publicly available through the county assessor's office. James, those tax payments haven't been made since February." "That's impossible. Where did my money go?" I made some discreet inquiries with contacts at the courthouse. "Your brother Tyler got married last month at the Phoenician Resort. That's a venue that starts at $25,000 for a basic wedding package." The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. "They used my mortgage money for Tyler's wedding." "It appears so. Your mother's credit card statements, which became public record when she applied for a payment plan with the county's show purchases from David's Bridal Paradise Catering and Scottsdale Limousine Service. All within the last 6 months." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. While I was eating ramen noodles and working overtime to send the money for necessities, they were throwing an elaborate party for Tyler's marriage to Madison. "There's more," Patricia continued. "The wedding photographer alone cost $4,000. And according to the catering receipts, they hosted 150 guests with an open bar. This is unbelievable. They told me Dad's medication costs had gone up, and they were struggling to make ends meet. Frank's prescription records don't show any significant changes in the last year. His insurance through his former employer's COBRA plan covers most of his medications." Patricia spread out more documents, creating a financial timeline that painted a picture of systematic deception. Bank statements showed my $800 payments being deposited and then immediately withdrawn in cash or transferred to wedding-related vendors. The really troubling part is what happens next, Patricia said. In 23 days, if those property taxes aren't brought current, the county will file a notice of default. After that, they have 60 days to cure the default before losing the house entirely. What does that mean for my ownership stake? If the house goes to tax sale, your ownership percentage becomes meaningless. The county doesn't care about family disputes or who contributed what. They just want their money. I leaned forward, studying the foreclosure timeline. So Tyler's plan to inherit the family home could backfire completely. If they lose the house to taxes, nobody gets anything. Exactly. And here's the irony. Because you're a legal co-owner, you have the right to pay those back taxes yourself to protect your investment. Your parents can't stop you. That revelation hit like a lightning bolt. Tyler had manipulated our parents into locking me out, not realizing that I actually had more legal power over the property than he did. But there's something else you should know, Patricia continued. I looked up recent property sales in your neighborhood. James, your parents bought that house for $90,000 15 years ago. With all the development happening around Sky Harbor Airport, properties in that area are selling for significantly more now. How much more? Patricia pulled out a comparable market analysis she'd printed from the county assessor's website. Based on recent sales of similar properties within a half-mile radius, that house is currently worth approximately $420,000. I stared at the number, trying to process what this meant. My 40% stake is worth $168,000, give or take. Tyler's scheme to claim a modest family inheritance had just become a fight over a small fortune, and he had no idea what he'd gotten himself into. Patricia, I want to file for partition. She nodded slowly. That's one option. Partition forces a court-ordered sale or buyout when co-owners can't agree on how to handle jointly owned property. But James, this will destroy your relationship with your family forever. They already destroyed that when they changed the locks and stole my money for Tyler's wedding. Fair enough, but partition is nuclear option. Once we file those papers, there's no going back to Sunday dinners and family barbecues. I thought about Tyler's smirk when he'd closed the door in my face. I thought about 3 years of sacrificing my own financial goals to help people who were lying to me and stealing from me. File the papers. The Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy looked like he'd delivered bad news to families 1,000 times before. His expression remained professionally neutral as he stood on my parents' front porch with the legal documents tucked inside a manila envelope. I watched from my truck parked across the street as he rang the doorbell. Through Patricia's connections, I'd learned that service of process usually happened between 9 and 11 in the morning when people were most likely to be home. The door opened, and I could see Carol's face change from confusion to alarm as the deputy began explaining why he was there. She called for Frank, who appeared in the doorway wearing his old plaid bathrobe and looking like he'd just woken up. After the deputy left, I saw frantic movement through the windows. Carol was pacing back and forth in the living room, while Frank sat heavily on the couch holding the legal papers like they might explode. My phone rang 20 minutes later. James, what the hell is this? Frank's voice was shaky with rage and panic. It's exactly what it says, Dad. A petition for partition of jointly owned real property. You can't do this to us. This is our home. It's also my home legally speaking. When I co-signed your refinance, I became a part owner. You can't just change the locks and pretend I don't exist. But Tyler said you were just on the loan, not the deed. Tyler was wrong. And now a judge is going to decide what happens to the property since we can't work it out like adults. I heard muffled voices in the background, and then Tyler came on the line. James, you need to drop this lawsuit right now. You're going to destroy Mom and Dad over some stupid family argument. This isn't about an argument, Tyler. It's about the $800 a month I've been sending that you spent on your wedding instead of property taxes. Silence. Yeah, I know about that. I know about the Phoenician resort, the open bar, the $4,000 photographer. While I was eating peanut butter sandwiches to save money for Mom and Dad's mortgage, you were throwing a party. That's not how it happened. Really? Because I have the county records showing 3 months of unpaid property taxes. I have credit card statements showing wedding expenses. Want to explain how that's not exactly how it happened? More muffled conversation, then Frank came back on the line. Son, we can work this out. You don't need lawyers and judges involved in family business. We tried working it out. You changed the locks. Tyler said you were threatening to kick us out. Tyler lied. But you believed him instead of the son who's been supporting you for 3 years. The call ended abruptly. Through the window, I could see Tyler gesturing wildly while Carol sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. 2 hours later, Patricia called with an update. The court has ordered an emergency property assessment. Since you're claiming the house is worth significantly more than your parents realize, the judge wants an independent appraisal before any decisions are made about partition or buyout options. How long will that take? The appraiser will be there Thursday morning. Your parents' attorney also filed a response claiming you have no legitimate ownership interest, so we'll need to present all the deed and refinancing documentation. They got a lawyer already. Local guy named Bill Morrison. He mostly handles divorces and DUIs, so he's probably in over his head on property law. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, unusual weather for Phoenix in late spring. I parked down the street and watched as a woman in a business suit approached the house carrying a clipboard and camera. Susan Martinez had been appraising properties in Phoenix for 15 years, and Patricia had specifically requested her because of her expertise in rapidly appreciating neighborhoods. She spent 3 hours measuring rooms, photographing every corner, and taking notes about recent upgrades and maintenance issues. When she finished, I approached her in the driveway. Ms. Martinez, I'm James, one of the property owners. Can you give me any preliminary thoughts? She glanced around the neighborhood, noting the construction cranes visible in the distance where new luxury condominiums were rising. Off the record, your timing for this dispute is either very good or very bad, depending on your perspective. This whole area is experiencing rapid gentrification due to the airport expansion project and the new light rail line they're building. What does that mean for property values? Let me put it this way. The house next door sold for $380,000 last month, and it's smaller than this one with no garage. Your property sits on a slightly larger lot and has better street access. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. We need to talk. Meet me at Denny's on Camelback in an hour. The Denny's restaurant smelled like coffee and defeated its fluorescent lights, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. Tyler sat in a corner booth staring at his untouched coffee, like it might contain answers to problems he was just beginning to understand. He looked up when I slid into the seat across from him. The cocky smirk from earlier in the week had been replaced by something approaching panic. The appraiser thinks the house is worth over $400,000, he said without preamble. I know, Patricia told me. Tyler's hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. James, I messed up. I messed up really bad. Which part, lying to our parents about me stealing my mortgage money for your wedding, or not understanding property law before you declared war? All of it. He set the cup down without drinking. Madison's threatening to leave me. That wasn't what I'd expected to hear. What does Madison have to do with any of this? Tyler looked around the restaurant as if checking for surveillance, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. Her dad has been pressuring me to get control of Mom and Dad's house ever since we got engaged. Madison's dad, Robert Sterling. You know him? I knew the name from local news stories about commercial real estate development, but I'd never connected him to Madison. He's that developer who's been buying up properties around the airport, right? Tyler nodded miserably. He told me that if I couldn't demonstrate family leadership and secure inherited assets, I wasn't good enough for his daughter. He promised me a job at Sterling Development, but only if I could prove I could handle family business. The pieces of this puzzle were shifting into a completely different picture. So this was never about you wanting to live in the house? Not really. I mean, Madison and I needed a place. But Robert made it sound like controlling family property was some kind of test of my character. Tyler, Do you have any idea what Robert Sterling's company actually does? Commercial development, shopping centers, office buildings, and residential development. He's been buying up houses in our neighborhood for months, probably planning some kind of large-scale project. Tyler's face went pale. You think he was using me to get Mom and Dad's property? Yeah. Before I could answer, Tyler's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted to pure dread. It's Madison. She's been texting me all morning about the lawsuit. He answered the call, and even from across the table, I could hear Madison's voice sharp with frustration. Tyler, my father, is furious. He says you've completely botched the family situation, and now there are lawyers involved. He wants to know why you didn't tell him about James being on the deed. Tyler covered the phone and whispered to me, "She's on her way here." 10 minutes later, Madison Sterling swept into the restaurant like a force of nature. At 24, she had the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive salons and designer clothes, but her face was flushed with anger. She slid into the booth next to Tyler and fixed me with a stare that could have frozen coffee. "James Wright, you're the brother who's trying to steal his parents' house." "I'm the brother who's been paying their mortgage for 3 years while you and Tyler spent my money on your wedding." Madison's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that she'd been crying recently. "That's not how it happened. Really, because I have bank records that say otherwise." She turned to Tyler. "You told me he was just making empty threats about ownership. You said your parents would choose you over him and that would be the end of it." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know he was actually on the deed. Your father specifically asked about legal complications, and you assured him there weren't any." That stopped me cold. "Madison, what exactly did your father tell you about this situation?" She looked between Tyler and me, suddenly seeming much younger than her 24 years. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. "He said that successful families consolidate their assets and that Tyler needed to demonstrate leadership by securing the family property. He said if Tyler couldn't handle something that simple, how could he trust him with business responsibilities? And if Tyler failed this test," Madison's composure cracked completely. "He said he'd reconsider whether I was making a good choice in marriage partners." The manipulation was breathtaking. Robert Sterling had used his daughter's engagement as leverage to pressure Tyler into securing a property that Sterling probably wanted for his own development projects. "Madison, there's something else you need to know," I said gently. "I think your father has been targeting properties in our neighborhood for commercial development. Tyler wasn't securing a family asset. He was being used to acquire real estate for your father's business." Madison stared at me for a long moment, then turned to Tyler. "Is that possible?" Tyler's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God," Madison whispered. "He's been playing us both." That's when she dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "Tyler, I'm pregnant." Tyler's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, sending brown liquids spreading across the linoleum. The few other customers in the restaurant turned to look at our booth. "You're what? 2 months? I found out last week right after the wedding. My father said this makes securing family assets even more important because we'll need to provide for the baby." I watched Tyler's face cycle through shock, panic, and something approaching terror as he realized how deeply he'd been manipulated. His father-in-law had used Madison's pregnancy as additional pressure to secure the house, probably knowing that desperate new parents would be willing to do almost anything to provide for their child. "Madison," I said carefully, "did your father know about the pregnancy when he started pressuring Tyler about the house?" She nodded slowly. "I told him the same day I told Tyler. And that's when he started talking about asset consolidation and leadership tests." Another nod. Tyler's head dropped into his hands. "I've destroyed everything. My relationship with you, with Mom and Dad, and now Madison's pregnant, and her father thinks I'm worthless." Madison reached over and took Tyler's hand, but she was looking at me when she spoke. "James, is there any way to fix this? Can you drop the lawsuit? I thought about the 3 months of unpaid property taxes, the lies Tyler had told our parents, the changed locks, and the $800 a month I'd been sending. that had been diverted to their wedding expenses. Madison, there's something you both need to understand. Even if I wanted to drop the lawsuit, the house is going into tax foreclosure in 3 weeks. Unless somebody pays $17,000 in back taxes and penalties, your father's opinion about family assets won't matter because there won't be any assets left to argue about. Tyler looked up from his hands. $17,000 plus interest and legal fees. The county doesn't care about family drama. They just want their money. Madison's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and her face went white. It's from my father. He says he needs to see me immediately about damage control for the family situation. As she stood to leave, Madison paused at the edge of the booth. Tyler, I need you to tell me the truth about something. Did you forge any documents to try to get control of the house? Tyler's silence lasted too long. Oh God, you did, didn't you? Tyler finally nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I tried to sign Dad's name on a quitclaim deed last night. I thought if I could transfer his portion to me, the lawsuit would become simpler. Madison stared at him with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. That's fraud, Tyler. That's a felony. I was desperate. Robert said if I couldn't handle this situation, he'd make sure I never worked in Phoenix again. Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. You committed a crime because my father threatened your career prospects. When Tyler didn't answer, Madison walked out of the restaurant without another word, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his choices and me trying to figure out how our family had gotten so far off course. Patricia's office felt different this time, charged with the kind of tension that comes when legal situations spiral beyond simple civil disputes into criminal territory. She sat across from me with a new file folder, this one thicker than before and marked with red tabs that usually indicated urgent matters. James, we have a problem, a big one. She opened the folder to reveal photocopies of documents I'd never seen before. At the top of the stack was a quitclaim deed with Frank's signature, except the handwriting looked nothing like my father's careful, engineer-trained script. Tyler attempted to forge your father's signature on a property transfer deed. He filed it with the county recorder's office yesterday morning. I studied the signature, comparing it to Frank's real signature on other documents in the file. The forgery was clumsy, desperate, and obvious. How did you find out about this? Routine title search for the partition case. When I saw a deed filed after our lawsuit was submitted, I knew something was wrong. I called your father to verify, and he had no knowledge of signing anything. Patricia pulled out another document, this one bearing the official seal of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Frank filed a criminal complaint this morning. Detective Rodriguez from the White Collar Crime Unit will be investigating. The implications hit me like a brick wall. Tyler wasn't just facing a family dispute anymore. He was looking at potential felony charges for document fraud. There's more, Patricia continued. I did some background research on Robert Sterling's development company after your conversation with Madison. James, your family appears to be caught up in something much larger than a simple property dispute. She spread out a series of newspaper clippings and county records. The headlines told a disturbing story. Elderly homeowners report pressure tactics from development company. FBI investigates allegations of real estate fraud. Phoenix developer accused of targeting vulnerable families. Sterling Development has been under federal investigation for 6 months. They're accused of using intimidation fraud and family pressure to acquire properties below market value for large-scale commercial projects. I scanned the articles, seeing familiar patterns. Adult children pressured to convince elderly parents to sell. Promises of financial security that never materialized. Families torn apart by manipulation and greed. How many families are involved? At least 47 that have filed complaints with the FBI. But the real number is probably much higher because many victims are too embarrassed to come forward. Patricia's phone rang and she glanced at the caller ID before answering. This is Patricia Hendricks. Yes, he's here with me now. I understand. We'll be there within the hour. She hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That was FBI agent Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit. She wants to meet with us about the Sterling investigation. An hour later, we sat in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office in downtown Phoenix. Agent Chen looked like she'd stepped out of a recruitment poster, professional alert, and carrying herself with the kind of authority that came from years of unraveling complex financial schemes. Mr. James, your family's situation has provided us with some crucial pieces of evidence in our investigation of Sterling development. She opened a laptop and turned the screen toward us, revealing a flowchart that looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. Lines connected dozens of names, property addresses, and financial transactions. Robert Sterling's company has been systematically targeting properties in rapidly appreciating neighborhoods, using family members to pressure elderly owners into quick sales. Your brother Tyler was recruited as what we call an inside asset, someone with family access who could manipulate the property owners. Recruited how? Through Madison. Sterling arranged her relationship with Tyler specifically because he knew your parents owned property in a target area. The engagement, the wedding expenses, the pressure about family leadership, it was all calculated to put Tyler in a position where he'd do whatever necessary to secure the house. I thought about Madison's tears in the restaurant, her genuine shock at learning she'd been used as a tool in her father's scheme. Does Madison know? Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. We don't believe so. Sterling appears to have manipulated his own daughter as part of the scheme. She's actually been very cooperative since we approached her yesterday. You've already talked to Madison. She came to us after your meeting at the restaurant. When she realized her father had been using her pregnancy and marriage as leverage, she decided to help with the investigation. Agent Chen clicked to another screen, this one showing financial records and property transfers. Sterling's pattern is to identify properties in developing areas, research the family dynamics, then use children or grandchildren to pressure elderly owners into sales at below-market prices. The families think they're making smart financial decisions, but they're actually being defrauded out of hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity. What about Tyler's forgery attempt? That actually helps our case. It demonstrates the extreme pressure Sterling's manipulation creates. Tyler committed a felony because he was desperate to meet Sterling's demands and keep his marriage intact. Patricia leaned forward. What kind of penalties is Sterling looking at? Federal charges include mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of fair housing laws. If convicted on all counts, he's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Agent Chen turned back to me. James, we'd like you to consider participating in a controlled operation. Sterling doesn't know we're investigating him yet, and he's still pressuring Tyler to resolve the property situation. What kind of operation? Tyler would wear a recording device during meetings with Sterling. We need evidence of Sterling directly instructing him to commit fraud or use illegal pressure tactics. The idea of Tyler cooperating with law enforcement seemed impossible given how deep he'd gotten into Sterling's scheme. Would Tyler agree to that he's facing criminal charges himself? The county attorney has agreed to consider reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. Tyler could potentially avoid jail time if he helps us build a case against Sterling. Patricia and I exchanged glances. The legal situation had evolved far beyond a family property dispute into a federal criminal investigation. Agent Chen, what happens to our partition lawsuit while this investigation proceeds? The court will likely suspend civil proceedings until the criminal matters are resolved. But there's something else you should know. Your family qualifies for protection under the Elder Financial Abuse Prevention Act. As victims of Sterling's scheme, your parents could receive compensation and protection from foreclosure. What kind of compensation? Victims can recover not just their financial losses, but punitive damages for emotional distress and property damage. In cases similar to yours, families have received settlements in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. For the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching hope. Maybe this disaster could actually result in justice, not just for our family, but for all the other families Sterling had targeted. Agent Chen closed her laptop and handed me a business card. Think about our offer regarding Tyler's cooperation. Sterling is scheduled to meet with him tomorrow afternoon to discuss resolving the family property crisis. It could be our best opportunity to get him on tape admitting to fraud. As we left the FBI office, Patricia turned to me with a question I'd been dreading. James, are you prepared for what happens next? If Tyler wears a wire and Sterling incriminates himself, your brother-in-law goes to federal prison and your family's story becomes public record in a major fraud case. I thought about all the other families Sterling had manipulated, all the elderly parents who'd been pressured into devastating financial decisions by their own children. He needs to be stopped. The FBI surveillance van looked like any other utility vehicle parked outside the Starbucks in North Scottsdale, but inside Agent Chen and her team monitored every word of the conversation happening at the corner table near the window. Tyler sat across from Robert Sterling, a recording device no bigger than a button hidden in his shirt collar. Through their earpieces, the FBI team could hear every word of Sterling's instructions. Tyler, this family lawsuit situation needs to be resolved immediately. Sterling's voice came through clearly. I've invested too much in this relationship for you to fail now. Patricia and I listened from the FBI field office where Agent Chen had allowed us to monitor the operation in real time. I tried everything you suggested. Tyler replied, his voice shaky with nerves. But James has legal ownership and the county is threatening foreclosure. Then we'll solve both problems at once. I want you to approach the county tax office and offer to pay the back taxes in your name. Once you've done that, file for adverse possession, claiming you've been maintaining the property. Even through the recording equipment, Sterling's casual discussion of fraud was chilling. But that's not legal, is it? James is on the deed. Tyler's successful businessmen don't let legal technicalities prevent them from protecting their families. Your wife is pregnant. Do you want to provide for that child or not? Agent Chen made notes on her legal pad documenting each instance of Sterling instructing Tyler to commit fraud. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Robert. My brother found out about the money we spent on the wedding, and my parents know I lied to them. Sterling's tone hardened. Let me be very clear about something, Tyler. I've spent considerable resources positioning you for success. The job offer at Sterling Development Madison's trust fund, even the down payment assistance I provided for your wedding expenses, all of that was contingent on your ability to handle family business. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you can't deliver on this property situation, I'll make sure you never work in commercial real estate in Arizona again. Madison will lose her trust fund access, and you'll be explaining to your pregnant wife why her father no longer considers you family. Through the surveillance feed, we could see Tyler's hands shaking as he reached for his coffee cup. But what if James won't cooperate? What if he insists on the partition lawsuit? Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the FBI equipment still picked up clearly. Tyler, there are ways to make property disputes very expensive and very complicated for the other party. I know attorneys who specialize in dragging out partition cases for years. I know appraisers who can find significant defects that reduce property values. I even know city inspectors who might discover code violations that require expensive corrections. You're talking about bribing government officials. I'm talking about using available resources to protect our interests. This is how business gets done in the real world. Agent Chen smiled grimly as she made more notes. Sterling had just confessed to multiple federal crimes while discussing plans to commit additional felonies. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sterling providing increasingly detailed instructions for fraudulent activities. He discussed plans to pressure other families in the neighborhood, methods for intimidating elderly homeowners, and strategies for acquiring properties below market value through manipulation and deception. When Tyler finally left the coffee shop, Agent Chen's team moved into action. Sterling was arrested in the parking lot as he walked to his Mercedes, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials, and elder abuse under federal law. 3 hours later, Patricia and I sat in her office reviewing the implications of Sterling's arrest. The criminal charges against Tyler will likely be reduced to misdemeanor fraud with probation and community service given his cooperation with the FBI investigation. What about the house situation? Patricia smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. James, the FBI's Victim Assistance Program, has some remarkable provisions for families affected by elder financial fraud. Not only will your parents be protected from foreclosure, but Sterling's company will be required to pay full restitution for any financial losses. She handed me a document from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Your family qualifies for emergency protection under the Elder Financial Abuse Prevention Act. The federal government will pay the back property taxes, prevent foreclosure, and provide financial counseling services. Additionally, Sterling Development will likely face civil penalties that could result in significant compensation for your parents. How significant? Based on similar cases, anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, depending on the final scope of Sterling's fraud scheme. The phone rang and Patricia answered with her usual professional greeting. After a brief conversation, she hung up with news that surprised me. That was Madison. She wants to meet with you and Tyler tomorrow to discuss family reconciliation. Reconciliation. Apparently, learning about her father's manipulation has given her some perspective on how your family was victimized. She's filed for divorce and wants to make amends for the role she unknowingly played in the situation. The next morning, Madison, Tyler, and I met at a small cafe in Tempe, far from the upscale Scottsdale locations where Sterling's influence might still carry weight. Madison looked exhausted but determined, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. "James owe you an enormous apology," she began. "I had no idea my father was using me to manipulate your family." Tyler sat silently, still processing the reality that his father-in-law was now in federal custody. "Madison, you were a victim too. You couldn't have known what Sterling was planning." "But I should have questioned why he was so interested in Tyler's family property. I should have realized that normal fathers-in-law don't obsess over their children's inheritance prospects." She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. "This is for $17,500. It covers the back property taxes and penalties. I want to pay them myself as an apology for my family's role in this disaster." Tyler looked up for the first time since we'd sat down. "Madison, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. My father used our marriage and pregnancy as weapons against your family. The least I can do is fix the immediate financial crisis." "What about your divorce and the baby?" Madison's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I'll raise the child myself. I have family money that my father can't touch, and I'm going back to school to finish my education degree. I want to teach elementary school and do something meaningful with my life instead of being a pawn in real estate schemes." Looking at Madison's determination to rebuild her life and Tyler's obvious remorse for his choices, I realized that Sterling's manipulation had victimized everyone in different ways. "Tyler, what are you planning to do now?" "Community service at the senior center, helping elderly people understand their legal rights. The judge thought it was appropriate given the nature of my crimes." "And after that," Tyler shrugged. "Find a job that doesn't involve lying to family members or committing fraud. Maybe go back to school and learn a legitimate trade." As we prepared to leave the cafe, Tyler stopped me with a question I'd been expecting. "James, do you think Mom and Dad will ever forgive me?" I thought about the pain Tyler's lies had caused, the financial stress he'd created, and the way he'd manipulated our parents' emotions to serve Sterling's agenda. "Tyler, I think they'll forgive you eventually, but you're going to have to earn back their trust through actions, not words. And it's going to take time." "What about us? Can we ever be brothers again?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with years of sibling rivalry and recent betrayals. We'll always be brothers, Tyler. But we need to rebuild our relationship based on honesty and respect, not the manipulation and lies that got us into this mess. As I drove home that afternoon, I reflected on how dramatically our family situation had changed in just 2 weeks. What started as a simple property dispute had uncovered a complex fraud scheme, led to federal criminal charges, and forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about family loyalty, financial manipulation, and the difference between enabling someone and truly helping them. The house would remain in the family protected by federal law and compensation from Sterling's criminal enterprise. Tyler would face consequences for his actions, but avoid prison time. Madison would rebuild her life free from her father's influence. And our parents would finally understand the difference between being helped and being controlled. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of the house that had nearly torn our family apart, watching Tyler teach our father, Frank, how to install new deck railings. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same hands that had forged Frank's signature were now working alongside him to improve the property we'd fought over so bitterly. The federal case against Robert Sterling had concluded with a conviction on all counts. He received 28 years in federal prison, and his company was ordered to pay $7 million in restitution to victims. Our family's portion came to $137,000 money that Frank and Carol decided to split equally among their children as an inheritance advance. Tyler's community service at the Phoenix Senior Center had evolved into a paid position as a victim advocacy coordinator. Every day he helped elderly residents understand their legal rights and recognize the warning signs of financial fraud. The judge who sentenced him said it was the most appropriate rehabilitation he'd ever seen. Tyler's personal experience with manipulation made him uniquely qualified to help other families avoid similar disasters. "James, can you hand me that level?" Frank called out from the deck. His relationship with Tyler remained strained, but they were working on rebuilding trust through shared projects and honest conversations. Carol emerged from the kitchen carrying a pitcher of iced tea, her demeanor much lighter than it had been during the crisis. Learning that they'd been victims of an elaborate fraud scheme rather than simply caught in a family property dispute had helped her process the guilt she'd felt about believing Tyler's lies. "Madison called this morning," Carol said, settling into a lawn chair. "The baby's doing well and she starts her teaching job next month." Madison had given birth to a daughter she named Hope, a choice that seemed to symbolize her determination to build a positive future from the wreckage of her father's crimes. She and Tyler maintained an amicable co-parenting relationship, though their romantic relationship had ended with her father's arrest. "How's Tyler doing with the custody arrangement?" I asked. "Better than expected," Carol replied. "He sees Hope twice a week and Madison says he's a devoted father. I think having a daughter has given him perspective on what really matters in life." Patricia Hendricks arrived as we were finishing the deck work, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a satisfied expression. "I have news about the Neighborhood Protection Program," she announced. "The City Council approved the Historic District designation. Properties in this area are now protected from forced development and predatory real estate practices. The Historic District designation had been proposed by neighborhood residents after learning about Sterling's scheme. It ensured that families couldn't be pressured into quick sales by developers, and it preserved the character of the community that had been under threat. "What does that mean for property values?" Frank asked. "Stable, gradual appreciation rather than the wild speculation Sterling was trying to create. You'll never have to worry about losing the house to tax foreclosure or developer pressure again." As the afternoon wore on, neighbors began stopping by to check on the deck project and share community news. The Johnsons from next door brought homemade cookies. Mrs. Peterson from across the street offered to help with the garden renovation Carol was planning. Watching these interactions, I realized that Sterling's scheme had actually strengthened our neighborhood community. Families that had barely spoken before were now looking out for each other, sharing information about suspicious business offers, and supporting elderly residents who might be vulnerable to manipulation. Tyler finished securing the last railing and stepped back to admire the work. "Dad, I need to say something." Frank set down his tools and gave Tyler his full attention. "I'm sorry for lying to you and Mom about James. I'm sorry for stealing the mortgage money for my wedding, and I'm sorry for putting you through the stress of almost losing the house. Frank nodded slowly. Tyler, I accept your apology. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust is going to take time. You made choices that put our entire family at risk. I know, and I'll spend as long as necessary proving that I've learned from those mistakes. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Sarah Chen, who had become something of a family friend during the investigation. I wanted to update you on the broader impact of the Sterling case, she said, accepting Carol's offer of iced tea. 43 families have received compensation through the Victim Restitution Fund, totaling over $6 million. And 3 other real estate fraud schemes in Arizona have been shut down using intelligence gathered from Sterling's organization. How many people were Sterling and his associates targeting? I asked. We estimate at least 200 families across the Phoenix metro area. Your family's willingness to cooperate prevented a lot of other people from losing their homes. Agent Chen turned to Tyler. Your work at the Senior Center has been invaluable. The educational workshops you've developed are being implemented at senior centers statewide. Tyler's face flushed with pride and embarrassment. It feels good to use my experience for something positive instead of destructive. As evening approached and our guests departed, the 4 of us sat on the new deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The silence was comfortable, the kind that comes from family members who've survived a crisis together and emerged stronger. James, Frank said eventually, I owe you an apology too. When Tyler told us you were threatening to take our house, we should have talked to you directly instead of changing the locks. You were scared, Dad. Sterling's entire scheme was designed to make families panic and act against their own interests. But we should have trusted you. You'd been supporting us for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Carol reached over and squeezed my hand. We're proud of how you handled this situation. You could have been vindictive when you discovered our mistakes, but you chose to find solutions that protected everyone. Tyler cleared his throat. James, I need to ask you something. Do you think what we went through was worth it? All the pain and legal battles and family trauma? I considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have said nothing was worth the anguish our family had endured. But looking around at the peaceful scene, Frank and Tyler working together, Carol relaxed and happy, a neighborhood community strengthened by shared adversity. I realized the crisis had forced us to confront problems that had been building for years. Tyler, I think families sometimes need to go through difficult times to learn who they really are and what they really value. Sterling's manipulation created a crisis, but it also revealed strengths we didn't know we had. What kind of strengths? Your ability to recognize your mistakes and make amends? Mom and Dad's willingness to admit when they were wrong? My understanding that protecting family sometimes means standing up to family. And all of our capacity to choose forgiveness over permanent resentment. Frank nodded thoughtfully. The house was never the real issue. The real issue was learning to communicate honestly instead of assuming the worst about each other's motivations. As we prepared to go inside, Carol made an announcement that surprised everyone. Frank and I have decided to create a family trust that includes all 3 children as beneficiaries. When we're gone, you'll share the property equally, and nobody will ever have to fight over inheritance again. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. Mom, after everything I did, you're still including me. Tyler, you made serious mistakes, but you've worked hard to make amends. Forgiveness means giving people the chance to prove they've changed. That night, as I drove back to my own apartment, I reflected on the profound life lessons our family's crisis had taught me. Family loyalty doesn't mean blindly supporting relatives who make destructive choices. True love sometimes requires saying no to people you care about and holding them accountable for their actions. Financial transparency is essential in family relationships. Secrets about money inevitably lead to suspicion, resentment, and manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for what's legally and ethically right isn't selfish, even when other people accuse you of being greedy or vindictive. Sterling's scheme succeeded because he convinced Tyler that challenging family dynamics made him disloyal. In reality, my willingness to file the partition lawsuit and expose Tyler's fraud was what ultimately saved our family from financial ruin and criminal liability. The experience also taught me that some people will try to exploit family bonds for personal gain. Recognizing manipulation doesn't make you cynical. It makes you wise enough to protect the people you love from those who would harm them. Our neighborhood community grew stronger because residents learned to look out for each other instead of assuming that family business was private business. Elder financial abuse thrives in isolation, but it withers when communities stay connected and informed. Tyler's transformation from fraud perpetrator to victim advocate demonstrated that people can change when they face real consequences for their choices and commit to making amends through actions rather than words. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that justice and forgiveness aren't opposing forces. They're complementary aspects of healthy relationships. Holding Tyler accountable for his crimes was what made forgiveness possible. Without consequences, forgiveness becomes enabling, and enabling ultimately helps no one. The house that Sterling tried to steal through manipulation and fraud became a symbol of our family's resilience. But the real victory wasn't keeping the property, it was learning to value honesty over harmony, justice over false peace, and genuine communication over comfortable lies. Today, our family gathers regularly at the house for barbecues, holiday celebrations, and simple conversations. Tyler's daughter, Hope, plays in the same backyard where Tyler and I played as children, but she's growing up in a family that has learned the difference between love and manipulation, between loyalty and enabling, between keeping the peace and keeping the truth. The deck Tyler and Frank built together stands as a reminder that relationships damaged by deception can be rebuilt through honest work and patient forgiveness. But the foundation has to be solid, built on respect and accountability rather than guilt and obligation. Every family will face tests of loyalty, honesty, and justice. The question isn't whether conflicts will arise, but how we choose to handle them when they do. We can choose manipulation over honesty, enabling over accountability, and false peace over genuine resolution. Or we can choose the harder path of transparent communication, appropriate consequences, and earned forgiveness. Our family chose the harder path, and it led us to a stronger, more honest, and more resilient set of relationships than we'd ever had before. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give people you love is refusing to enable their destructive choices, even when they hate you for it in the moment. The house is just a building. The family relationships we rebuilt through crisis accountability and forgiveness, those are the real inheritance we'll pass down to future generations. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and doing what was legally or ethically right? How did your family handle financial disagreements that threatened to tear relationships apart? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about standing up for justice, even when it's difficult. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories about family challenges and legal victories, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my family's journey from manipulation to justice, and I hope our experience helps you navigate your own difficult family situations with wisdom, courage, and hope.